Welcome to my video on asset security. In this video, you'll learn the key principles behind managing and securing organizational and information system assets. It's crucial to protect assets based on their value and the legal requirements surrounding them. Throughout this video, we'll cover important concepts such as asset identification and valuation, the data lifecycle, and best practices for implementing effective asset protection. Let's dive in. In this video, we'll cover the identification and protection of assets throughout their entire life cycle. To start, it's essential to understand what we're focusing on in this domain. This includes information and asset classification, asset protection, the data lifecycle, and data protection. Here, we're looking at two main areas. First, the overall assets of the organization, which include both physical and intangible assets, and second, specifically information or data assets, which are among the most valuable and critical assets an organization holds. An asset is defined as any item of value that is owned, whether it's valuable to its owner or to someone else. Identifying and valuing these assets is crucial. There are different types of assets to consider. Current assets, short-term assets like inventory on hand. Fixed assets, long-term assets such as real property or facilities. Intangible assets, non-physical assets like patents, company reputation, and goodwill. Physical assets, tangible items like equipment. Financial assets, stocks, bonds, and other financial instruments held by the organization. Asset management begins with identifying what assets the organization has and determining who owns each asset. The goal is to ensure that each asset receives the appropriate level of protection as determined by the owner. Once identified, assets must be classified. This is essential because not all assets have the same value and thus require different handling. Classification should be structured, not ad hoc, to ensure consistency across the organization. The life cycle of an asset, from acquisition to disposal, must be managed carefully. Classifying an asset helps determine the level of protection it requires. Protecting an asset too much can be inefficient, while underprotecting it could lead to vulnerabilities. Proper classification also guides users, custodians, network administrators, and system admins on how to handle and protect assets. For example, developers must follow specific protocols when working with assets like source code or test data. A formal classification process also demonstrates the organization's commitment to compliance with legal requirements and its dedication to safeguarding the interests of all stakeholders, including owners, customers, employees, and financial backers. The value of classification is clear. It influences key areas like system development, risk management, business continuity, and disaster recovery planning. It also aids in financial accounting and ensures that information systems are protecting the assets they contain. To summarize, asset classification is a critical component of any information security program. It helps us identify what needs protection and allows us to develop a program to protect assets appropriately based on their classifications. In asset classification, the value of an asset is often determined by its importance to the business and its criticality in supporting operations. If an asset were to become unavailable, how would that impact the business? In many cases, the value can also be tied to liability. For example, improper handling of equipment that leads to injury could create a liability related to that asset. Additionally, the asset's value can be based on its convertibility, whether it can be turned into cash or another asset. In research, asset value is often assessed based on the future benefits it may bring. Consider the case where a company loses control over its research and a competitor gains access, potentially overtaking them in the market. This highlights that asset value isn't just about what it's worth to the owner, but also what a competitor would be willing to pay for that information. For instance, how much would a competitor pay to understand your company's marketing strategy for the next year? The value of information assets is often tied to how crucial that information is for the organization's daily operations. Legal liabilities also play a role. Laws regarding privacy or contracts, for example, can affect asset value. A failure to adhere to contract terms can not only result in legal issues, but damage the company's reputation. Information assets differ from tangible ones in that if data is stolen, it's often still present, just inaccessible. This is common in ransomware attacks, where data is locked, and organizations must pay to recover it. The cost of recovery and associated liabilities can be significant. There are various ways to classify assets. In business, we might use terms like business private or business confidential, while the military uses top secret or secret. In government, classifications like sensitive, but unclassified or for official use only are common. These terms highlight the level of protection required for different types of information. Some should be protected but aren't classified, while others need stricter controls. The number of classification levels to use depends on the types of assets and their relative value. Asset owners must decide on an appropriate classification system. Labels should be meaningful to ensure that employees understand how to handle each asset appropriately. A structured, consistent classification system is crucial to ensure proper protection. Sometimes, there may be overlap between classifications. It's not always easy to draw hard lines between categories, and context may influence how assets are classified. This brings us to system categorization, especially for security purposes. For example, systems that process sensitive data or require high availability might need a higher classification. Additionally, aggregation plays a role. Separate pieces of unclassified data may, when combined, reveal classified information, thus requiring a higher classification for the system that processes them. Each classification should come with clear handling requirements. This could include how data is stored, whether it needs to be locked away or password protected, and how it is transmitted, such as through encryption. Physical security is also important. For instance, sensitive information might be transported using armored vehicles. Display policies, such as clear screen or clean desk policies, are essential to ensure sensitive data isn't exposed. At the heart of asset classification is policy. A well-established policy defines how assets are classified across the organization, ensuring consistency. It's important to enforce access rules to prevent assets from being left vulnerable. As part of asset classification, we also need to consider declassification. Assets that were once valuable may lose their value over time, and continuing to protect them could be unnecessary. This can happen automatically, e.g., when an asset is no longer relevant, or on a scheduled basis, or triggered by specific events. In summary, determining the ideal number of classification levels and defining their boundaries can be challenging. Overlap between classifications may exist, so it's important to provide guidance on how to classify assets correctly when they are received. Asset protection. Continuing on with asset security, let's now focus on how to protect our assets. In a previous module, we discussed information and asset classification, and later we'll dive deeper into data, the data lifecycle, and data protection. However, keep in mind that assets include more than just data. So, how do we protect all these assets? Protection starts with the identification of assets, both tangible and intangible. Once identified, it's crucial to determine who owns the asset. In some cases, ownership may be shared. For example, a customer relationship management (CRM) system could be jointly owned by the finance and HR departments. In such cases, it's important to decide who has the final say when it comes to decisions related to the asset. Not all decisions can be made by committee, especially if the asset spans across multiple divisions. After identifying ownership, we classify the assets and examine their dependencies. Does this asset rely on other systems or resources? Each classification should have clear criteria on how to protect the asset, including maintenance and eventual destruction at the end of its life cycle. Asset protection is also influenced by the labels assigned to each asset. Proper labeling helps people identify whether an asset is protected and to whom it belongs. Labels can be physical, like stickers or RFID tags, or electronic, such as watermarks in digital files. However, labels are only useful if people understand their meaning. For example, if a report is labeled business private, employees need to know whether it can be shared with a coworker, left on a desk, or needs to be shredded. This is where training and awareness are essential. In addition to training, the protection of assets requires ongoing maintenance. This includes ensuring the proper upkeep of systems and the infrastructure supporting those assets. We also need to periodically review asset classifications. Are they still accurate, or should the classification change based on updated risk assessments? Labels can also be used to track assets, like through RFID chips that allow us to monitor the location of physical assets. Electronic labels, such as embedded watermarks, also establish ownership and protect the integrity of information. Along with classification and labeling, the principle of need to know plays a critical role in asset protection. We must ensure that only authorized individuals, both internal and external, are granted access to protected assets. In some cases, we may want to keep certain information hidden to prevent unauthorized access. Regular maintenance is also a key part of asset protection. For software, this means patching vulnerabilities. For hardware, it's important to keep track of the device's life expectancy, like understanding the mean time between failure for hard drives or other components. We need to be prepared for when these assets will need to be replaced or repaired. We also need to protect the infrastructure supporting these assets. This includes having adequate power and backup systems in place to handle potential power failures. The Uptime Institute, for example, defines different tiers of data centers, each offering varying levels of fault tolerance and continuous operation. Depending on the criticality of business processes, we may need to invest in higher-tier data centers to ensure the reliability of our operations. Network redundancy is another consideration, ensuring that our network infrastructure can handle potential disruptions and continue supporting business needs. Physical security is also vital. We need strong access controls to ensure only authorized personnel can access sensitive equipment. In addition, we should consider the potential impact of natural events, such as storms or floods, and address the risks of theft or misuse of assets. Finally, asset classifications should be periodically reviewed. If an asset no longer requires a high level of protection, it should be declassified accordingly. To summarize, protecting an asset isn't just about safeguarding the asset itself. It also involves protecting the infrastructure that supports it and ensuring that proper maintenance, labeling, and classification processes are in place. Asset management. Let's take a look at asset management. The first step in managing assets is having a comprehensive inventory. It's essential to know exactly what assets you have, but asset management goes beyond just counting tangible items like laptops. We must also account for intangible assets, those things we can't physically touch but are still valuable to the organization, such as virtual machines, VMs. A virtual machine configuration, for example, is an important asset that requires proper management and protection. To effectively manage assets, organizations typically use an asset management database. This database contains detailed information about all assets, such as a unique identifier for each asset, the type of asset, e.g., model number, serial number, the service start date, when the asset was first used, the asset's expiration date, e.g., how long a piece of hardware is expected to last before it needs replacement, maintenance schedules, to ensure assets receive regular upkeep, asset ownership details, who is responsible for the asset, location of the asset, especially important for portable items like laptops. For example, it's crucial to track where portable assets are, as these can easily be misplaced. A major law enforcement agency, for instance, lost an average of 1,000 laptops per year, not because they were stolen, but because the laptops were moved between offices and no one kept track of their location. This underscores the importance of having clear visibility into the location and status of all assets. Asset management procedures start by entering all acquired assets into the asset management database. To streamline this process, many organizations have a centralized acquisition process. Additionally, organizations should monitor assets that are nearing the end of their life cycle to plan for timely replacements. When an asset is removed from service, it should also be updated or removed from the asset management database. It's also crucial to link asset management with configuration management. A configuration management database, CMDB, specifies the required baseline configurations for all assets. For example, when purchasing hardware, the organization should define the baseline configuration for devices like laptops, desktops, or other devices, ensuring they meet company standards. Centralized acquisition helps maintain control over these configurations, but this can become more challenging with bring-your-own device, BYOD, policies, or locally purchased hardware. Another solution is the choose your own device model, where employees can select from a few pre-approved devices. Even in this case, the organization should ensure that all devices meet the correct configuration standards. This same concept applies to virtual machines, VMs. When spinning up a new VM, organizations should ensure that the configuration is aligned with security standards and company policies. Effective configuration management also supports compliance scans. These scans ensure that all devices on the network are running the correct patches and configurations, and that unauthorized or improperly configured devices aren't connected. For example, discovery scans can help identify any unauthorized devices that may have been connected to the network. Decommissioning. Retention. Let's take a look at asset retention. Retention is based on the requirements for how long we need to keep certain assets. This is often dictated by law, such as the requirement to retain financial records for a specific number of years, or based on the business's need for the information. We shouldn't keep data that is no longer necessary, as it simply takes up space and incurs storage costs. For example, old emails that are no longer useful can often be deleted. However, there are times when we keep information due to its historical significance or value to the organization, even if we're no longer required to retain it by law. This can include records that have symbolic value or those that are important to the organization's legacy. Everything starts with an asset retention policy. This policy ensures that all assets are retained according to legal requirements so that nothing is destroyed that might later be needed for legal purposes. The policy should also outline the methods for retaining assets, such as whether they will be archived and if those archives will be encrypted. It's important to not only store assets securely, but also to ensure that we can still access them in the future. This might include securing encryption keys and ensuring we have procedures in place for long-term access. When it comes to asset destruction, we need to ensure it is done securely and in a manner that provides proof of destruction. For example, hardware may contain sensitive data, and it's not enough to simply discard it. The asset must be destroyed in a way that ensures no data can be recovered. This process can involve having an audit trail or witness confirmation. Physical destruction is the most secure way to destroy hardware, ensuring that no sensitive data is left behind. There have been cases where individuals responsible for destruction have been found reselling old hardware or donating it to charities, while still containing corporate data. When securely deleting data, especially from cloud environments, the process becomes a bit more complex. As cloud consumers, we don't have direct control over whether the provider securely deletes our data. That's why it's important to have clear contractual agreements in place with cloud providers. These agreements should ensure that old equipment is securely destroyed, and if we move data to another provider, we can use processes like crypto shredding, destroying the encryption key that was used to protect the data. This ensures the data is unrecoverable. In the case of data on physical devices like hard drives or tapes, one secure method of destruction is degaussing. Degaussing involves applying a strong magnetic force to disrupt the magnetic fields on the storage medium, making the data unrecoverable. Another important aspect is monitoring when assets reach the end of life. This could be because the device is no longer supported by the manufacturer or because it has become outdated and no longer serves its purpose. When an asset reaches its end of life, we must ensure that proper replacement plans are in place. This is particularly relevant with virtual machines, VMs, as many companies face VM sprawl, where unused VMs continue to consume resources in the cloud, costing money without providing value. Regularly reviewing and decommissioning these VMs can save a significant amount of resources. When an asset or system is decommissioned, there should be a formal process to terminate any connections or integrations with other systems. This ensures that no residual access points remain open and that both sides of the business are notified of the changes. After termination, the asset can be archived temporarily for recovery in case any issues arise later. As part of the end-of-life procedure, we should also clean up the asset management database. This means removing any documentation related to maintenance, operational procedures, and access controls. Additionally, we should update our business continuity and disaster recovery plans to reflect the decommissioning of the asset. Finally, we must ensure that secure destruction procedures are followed, right up until the asset's end of life. One of the most famous examples of the importance of secure deletion comes from World War II. The Enigma machine, used by the Germans for encrypted communications, was eventually cracked by the Allies. One of the key factors in breaking Enigma codes was the insecure deletion of the encryption keys, which provided vital information for the Polish mathematician Marian Rejewski. This highlights how important it is to follow secure deletion processes to prevent critical data from being accessed by unauthorized parties. Audit of asset security. Let's discuss auditing asset security. Like any program, asset management needs to be reviewed to ensure it's functioning correctly. This includes auditing both the acquisition and usage of assets. We have policies in place for managing assets, such as purchasing procedures and acceptable use policies. These policies govern how assets should be acquired and used, ensuring that they align with business needs and security requirements. The purchasing process often includes issuing an RFP, request for proposal, to vendors, listing our security requirements for hardware and software. Vendors must respond with details about how their products meet those security requirements. Once a product is chosen, we need to ensure that it meets the specifications agreed upon in the contract. A key part of asset security is maintenance. We need to decide whether to enter into a vendor maintenance agreement or take over the responsibility ourselves. Either way, it's crucial that we maintain our assets to ensure they remain secure and functional. Additionally, asset management policies should include access control measures, such as the principle of least privilege, to protect systems from unauthorized access or alteration. This can include determining whether employees should have administrator rights on their laptops, or if their access should be restricted. Striking the right balance is crucial. Too many privileges can lead to security risks, but too few can hinder productivity. We should also have clear ownership of assets, with designated individuals responsible for their protection. Privacy and security of sensitive information must be prioritized, and policies should specify how exceptions to these rules are handled. Any exception should be formally approved and documented, with the acceptance of any risks that come with it. When acquiring customized or proprietary software, it's important to determine who owns the source code. If we don't own it, we should use escrow to ensure access to the source code in the event that we need to make changes. For open source software, tools like Software Composition Analysis, SCA, help us verify the security and legality of the modules we integrate. Backup and version control of software, patches, and configurations is crucial. Any changes should go through a strict change control process to ensure they are tested, authorized, and documented. Ultimately, asset management requires regular review, auditing, and monitoring to ensure compliance with policies and that assets are secure. This helps protect the organization and ensures that all objectives of the asset management program are being met. Data use. Securing data in use. When data is in use, access permissions are crucial. These permissions should be set according to the principle of least privilege, only allowing access necessary for the role and need to know, only providing data access when required. Permissions may vary and include different levels, such as read-only, write-only, create, update, and delete. However, beyond just controlling access, it's important to have accountability. Logging all interactions with the data is key for compliance purposes. Every person who views or modifies data, or even attempts to access it, should have a record of their actions. This includes tracking who made changes and the nature of those changes, creating an audit trail for oversight and future reference. Data retention. When managing data, it's important to comply with legal and business requirements, as well as maintain its historical value. Data should be retained according to established policies and only for as long as necessary. For instance, data can be archived if it's no longer needed for immediate use, but must be stored securely for potential future use. Archiving requires careful attention to the media used. Whether the data is stored on tape, CDs, or other formats, the media's lifespan must be considered to ensure the data remains accessible. Some older media formats, like microfiche, may no longer be easily readable due to evolving technology, and we must ensure archived data can still be retrieved when needed. Encryption of archived data is common, but the encryption keys and algorithms must also be properly managed and stored to ensure the data can be recovered. Secure data deletion. When deleting data, the goal is to ensure that it's completely destroyed and cannot be recovered. The most secure method is physical destruction of storage media, but in cloud environments, this isn't always feasible. In such cases, techniques like crypto shredding and crypto erasure can be used, where the encryption key is destroyed, rendering the data inaccessible, even though it still exists on the media. Other deletion methods, such as overwriting, degaussing, demagnetizing, or simply deleting data, can also be effective. However, data remnants, fragments of data that remain after deletion, can pose significant risks. In some cases, it's possible to recover these remnants through advanced techniques, like using an electron microscope. Even after deletion, these bits of data could be reconstructed and compromise sensitive information. Residual data and transaction compromise. Residual data presents another challenge. If data from one transaction or process is left behind, it could corrupt or compromise subsequent transactions or users. This is often found in shared memory, such as cache, or in history folders, e.g., recent documents. The issue can also arise with non-initialized fields, for example, a field that previously stored an email address but hasn't been cleared before the next user accesses it. This could expose previous user data. This issue is common in environments like point-of-sale, POS systems, where failing to properly clear fields can lead to residual data being visible to the next customer or transaction. The same issue could occur with printer lines that are not properly cleared, potentially leaking sensitive information. Key takeaway. To maintain data security throughout its life cycle, consistent application of controls is essential. Regular monitoring and enforcement of data protection measures ensure data remains secure, both during active use and when archived or deleted. Managing the integrity and confidentiality of data at every stage is crucial to minimizing the risks of data leakage or compromise. Tailoring. Tailoring security and privacy controls. Tailoring security controls refers to the process of modifying baseline security and privacy controls to fit the specific needs of an organization or system. NIST defines tailoring as a critical step to ensure that controls are adjusted based on factors like the environment, operational needs, and risk tolerance of the organization. Here's a breakdown of the key components involved in tailoring controls. Key steps in tailoring controls. 1. Identify and designate common controls. Common controls are controls that protect more than one system at a location or across multiple locations. For example, physical access controls, such as locking doors, apply to multiple systems in a room. These controls can be managed by non-IT staff, such as facilities management. 2. Apply scoping considerations. Scoping determines which controls are necessary for your specific system. For instance, if a system has a public-facing interface, additional controls may be needed compared to an internal system with restricted access. 3. Select compensating controls. Compensating controls are alternative measures implemented when a baseline control is not feasible or practical. These controls are documented to address the gap left by the missing control. A compensating control can be managerial, e.g., additional audit reviews, technical, e.g., an additional layer of encryption, or physical, e.g., restricting physical access. 4. Assign values to organization-defined control parameters. This refers to defining the specific parameters for each control based on your organization's needs. For example, setting what constitutes an acceptable level of risk in a particular scenario. 5. Supplement with additional controls or control enhancements. In some cases, you might need to supplement the baseline controls with more advanced or enhanced controls to address unique risks or meet compliance requirements. 6. Provide specification information for implementation. Documenting how and why you've tailored the controls is critical. This helps demonstrate to auditors why certain controls were modified and justifies the use of alternatives like compensating controls. Types of controls: common versus system-specific. 1. Common controls. These are controls that protect multiple systems or locations. Examples include physical access controls, locks, surveillance, that apply to a whole building or room. HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, that support the environmental conditions of a data center. Public key infrastructure, PKI, which can support multiple systems with centralized identity management and encryption services. Common controls can often be managed by departments other than IT, like facilities management, and their implementation requires owner consent. 2. System-specific controls. These are tailored to an individual system. For instance, Tempest shielding, a specialized control to protect against electromagnetic emanations, e.g., shielding cables or using Faraday cages. Encryption. Encryption can be applied universally, e.g., for network traffic, or specifically, e.g., for protecting sensitive database information. These controls are unique to a particular system or application. Compensating controls. If a baseline control cannot be implemented, compensating controls provide an alternative approach to addressing the same risk. These controls might not be identical to the original requirement, but should mitigate the risk sufficiently. Examples include managerial compensating controls, additional audit oversight or manual reviews. Technical compensating controls, extra layers of security, such as implementing stronger encryption or multi-factor authentication when baseline controls, like firewalls, cannot be used. Physical compensating controls, enhanced physical security measures, like increasing the level of surveillance or adding additional guards. Why tailoring is important. The process of tailoring controls is essential because it ensures that your security posture is appropriate for the specific risks and requirements of your systems. You don't want to apply the same generic security controls across all systems. Instead, you should evaluate the needs and risks of each system, considering the operational environment, e.g., on-premises versus cloud, the system's role and the type of data it handles. Who will use the system and their access needs. Data protection revolves around ensuring that data is kept secure based on its classification and specific needs. The protection methods we use for data can be grouped into several categories, with a focus on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Data protection methods. Core concepts of data protection. Confidentiality. Encryption protects data by converting it into a format that can only be read by someone with the correct decryption key. Masking and obfuscation. Used to hide sensitive data, such as credit card numbers, by replacing it with generic characters or alternative identifiers, ensuring that even if the data is accessed, it cannot be read. Integrity. Hashing. Used to ensure that the data has not been altered. Hashing generates a unique string of characters based on the data, allowing you to verify that the data hasn't been tampered with. Common hashing algorithms include SHA-256. Digital signatures help ensure that the data is authentic and hasn't been altered since it was signed. Availability. Backups. Data should be regularly backed up to ensure availability in case of data loss or corruption. These backups should be stored securely, possibly off-site or in the cloud. Redundancy. Having systems in place so that if one part of the system fails, another part can take over, ensuring uninterrupted access to data. Access controls. Access controls are vital for securing data by regulating who can access the data and at what level. Need to know and least privilege. Users should only have access to the data necessary for their role and for the time required to perform their duties. Authentication and authorization. Ensuring users are who they claim to be through passwords, biometrics, etc., and granting access to data based on their roles and responsibilities. Data loss prevention, DLP. DLP tools are crucial for preventing unauthorized access, sharing, or leakage of sensitive data, both internally and externally. DLP is designed to identify and block potential data breaches by enforcing policies on how data can be used and transmitted. Internal protection. DLP tools can block sensitive data from being accessed or shared by unauthorized users within the organization. They might prevent copying sensitive information onto external drives or sharing it via email. External protection. DLP tools can also monitor data leaving the organization's network, ensuring that sensitive information doesn't exit the system without authorization, e.g., through email or file-sharing platforms. Keyword/pattern matching. DLP tools can scan for sensitive data patterns like payment card numbers, social security numbers, or personally identifiable information, PII, and prevent them from being transmitted outside the company. Digital rights management, DR. DRM is a control method used when data is allowed to leave the organization, but restrictions are placed on what users can do with it. Restricting actions on data. DRM provides a way to enforce policies on how external users can interact with sensitive data. For example, preventing printing or forwarding of sensitive documents, limiting users to view-only access, disabling the ability to download or save data locally. Limitations. While DRM is effective in controlling data distribution, it can't prevent all forms of misuse, e.g., taking pictures of the screen. Cloud Access Security Broker, CSB. With the rise of cloud services, it's essential to monitor and control the data flowing to and from the cloud. CSB tools are used to ensure that cloud-based data is secure and in compliance with company policies. Visibility and control. CASs provide visibility into the cloud services being used by the organization and ensure that data flowing out of the network is being sent securely to approved cloud providers. Compliance monitoring. Ensuring that cloud providers meet regulatory and contractual obligations, such as storing data in specific geographical locations. Shadow IT detection. CASs can identify unauthorized cloud services, often referred to as shadow IT, allowing security teams to address potential risks before they become issues.